Welcome to the Lift Your Story podcast with guest Tyler Foley, author and director of Total Buy-In.
Hi everyone, I'm Lorianne. I am that gal from Milton, Ontario, Canada, and I am with.
I am that guy, Roy Miller from Dallas, Texas. Would like to welcome you to our Lift Your Story podcast.
In this episode, we have Tyler Foley, and he is a best-selling author and director of Total Buy-In. Thank you so much for being with us today, Tyler.
It is my joy and my pleasure.
Well, I've got to ask you on your book, The Power to Speak Naked. So how did we come up with that title?
Well, first of all, I got it because I absolutely love hearing a Southern drawl say naked. So it was part to do with that. I actually, I've worked with Les Brown a few times, and me and him have been on stage a few times. And he always, now whenever I see him, he goes, "Tyler, you're that naked guy, right?" And I go, "Yes," because he's got, I think he's a Louisiana drawl. And, but yeah, no, and I do a lot of work in Houston. So every time I'm in Texas and I hear somebody say naked, it just brings me joy. But the title itself came, as to your question, Roy, very simply, it's kind of a play on that, everybody says if you want to get over stage fright, you picture the audience naked. Worst advice on the planet. I don't know who came up with that or why that's a thing, and I think you're trying to project somebody else's discomfort to make you feel comfortable. Whatever it is, bad advice, don't do it. But the title came because I want people to be able to be empowered to tell their story, raw and real, naked, without, the emperor's clothes, right? Mm-hmm. If you can stand up without any ornamentation, so you don't need a PowerPoint, you don't even need a microphone or a PA system, you don't need fancy lighting. Really, public speaking is about communicating and storytelling. So if you can jump into your authority and say who you are without any of the gimmicks and have the power to speak naked, you're off to the races.
Yeah.
Love that. In fact, it's funny, I was speaking on one of these Zoom things, because that's how we do the Chamber of Commerce now, right? It's like, come to the breakfast meeting. And I was doing a handwriting, and they kept asking me, "Don't you have a presentation?" I said, "No, I don't." So yeah. This is it. What you see is what you'll get. Yeah.
And oftentimes I find that to be so freeing, because we get locked into those presentations. And half the time that's where stage fright comes from, because you get so locked into this modality where you have to do this, and this is my click, and now I have this new slide, and if somebody asks a question, you can't pivot away from, no, but this is the slide. No, ask me about this slide, because I'm not prepared for what you asked. Where if you can do what you just did, which is free form, and say, "Hey, now here's here. Now I have my prepared notes." Well, we can come back to the prepared notes, but it's really hard when you get locked into a presentation.
It's funny you were talking about picturing the audience naked and all that, because I remember one time I was going to be an instructor. And so we had the training director, we had about 5 of us who was considering. And so, first our questions were, well, I'm not sure about speaking in front of people, all that, and, how do you do it? And he's, getting butterflies. He goes, "Well, the difference in you and me is my butterflies fly in formation."
Yeah, exactly.
So that was pretty good.
And oftentimes that, right, it's just knowing that there is no difference other than I'm now standing here. That, right? All 3 of us right now are public speaking. We're all presenting in some form or the other. It's just at which point who's listening and who's talking.
Right.
So I heard somewhere too, and I really like this, and this is going to lead into the next question. Somebody's saying that when you're going to go on stage, those butterflies, instead of thinking them as fear, think of them as excitement.
Yes.
Because it's a lot easier to go on stage with excitement than it is with fear. What do you have to say about your methods? Because you're saying, well, don't think of them as naked. I would just start laughing if I did that, but anyway.
Well, it is ridiculous, but it's so true, right? The butterflies, whether they're flying in formation or not, Roy, right? And it's actually so there's some psychology to that. So if you think about what that means that instructor took the time, and it's clever, because now his butterfly, who's controlling his butterflies at that point? He is. And it speaks to your point, Lorianne, about looking for excitement. See, when I first started public speaking, I was 6 years old. It was the first time I ever got on stage. And when you're 6, if anybody has young children, you know they have no fear, because they haven't been conditioned to learn the things that both imagined fears that society puts on them or real fears that they need to know. Like my daughter right now is 5 years old and will jump off of anything. So there's some real world dangers that she needs to be worried about, but there's also the imagined ones that she doesn't. The monsters in her closet don't really exist. And you know that, and I know that. But there is no difference between Mackenzie's monster in her closet and the fear that I'm putting in my head of the judgment that the imagined judgment that the audience is going to give me. So if I can look at my daughter and say, you can't be afraid of the imaginary monster in your closet, then I can't be afraid of the imaginary judgment that's coming from the audience of the words that I'm going to give. So when we're talking about fear and excitement, really, first of all, let's tackle where the fear comes from, because nobody is actually afraid of public speaking. The three of us are public speaking right now, and we're just having a conversation. And I guarantee if somebody actually is when you're listening to this podcast, I want you to stop for a moment and think, what were the last 5 conversations I had and where were they? They were in public, guaranteed. Even if they were in your house, you're still having a public discourse with somebody. And so you're not afraid of public speaking. What the fear is that somebody will not receive your words, that you will be judged for the things that you say or the opinions that you have and how you present them. And that's where the fear comes. So to your point, embracing the butterflies as excitement is one technique. For me, because I grew up in film and television and because I was on stage at 6 years old, the sound of applause and the feeling that you get from an audience is something I've always looked forward to. And in fact, I didn't ever really experience stage fright for almost 8 years of my life, because the first time I felt stage fright, I would have been about 13, 14 years old. So, quick math, 8 years. And I'll never forget the time that I had it, but it was the first time that I had felt judgment from an audience. More specifically, the first time I imagined that I was being judged by my audience. My audience wasn't actually judging me. In my head, I allowed it to get into my head. And so I always look forward to, in fact, I actively seek out opportunities to public speak. So there is that embrace the feeling of it, embrace the authority. But for some people who are like, yeah, that's great, I'm still stuck in this fearful bit of it, I would say don't worry about trying to make it something that you actively look forward to. Let's tackle the false belief that you're afraid of public speaking to begin with. And then we can get you to a point where you can look forward to it. Because that's the key. Before you can be like, this is the greatest thing of my life, and it is, man, is it fun. Before we can get you there, we need to get you past the I'm terrified of public speaking. And really that becomes making you comfortable in your authority, knowing that you're on that stage for a reason, and getting you over this fear of judgment because you're not afraid of public speaking.
Well, I think from an audience standpoint, you want to be told a story rather than be presented to.
Yes. And there's a real power in story. Les Brown says it famously, never make a point without a story and never tell a story without a point. And the reason that story is so powerful is because it's universal. If I tell a story well to you, I can put you into where I was and what my mind frame was. Mm-hmm. So for example, because I brought it up, the first time I did feel stage fright, I was 14 years old, and it was for Lorianne, it was a Remembrance Day ceremony. For Roy, it was a Veterans Day ceremony. See, covering my audience. Do a little audience research, makes the prep a little bit easier. And I because I had been in theater for as long as I had, I was always the one who was asked to read the poem in Flanders Fields because I didn't read it. I had memorized it. And because I was in performance, I really knew, there was some emotional gravitas to it, and I would give a delivery, right? In Flanders Fields, where the poppies grow among the crosses, row on row. And it was a thing that I could do. But this one presentation, we had gotten together in the assembly, and like most junior high assemblies, it's in a gymnasium, and they had the little podium set up, and I was sitting to the side, and I remember that they wheeled in this veteran. I don't know if he was a World War I or World War II veteran. This would have been early 90s, so he could have been either. He looked old. But he was in his full military regalia. He had the medals. And I remember them wheeling him in his wheelchair, coming up the aisle and putting him right in the front row. And he had this walking cane. And so he lifted it from his lap. And I remember him sitting on it and kind of looking like just a mean Clint Eastwood look. You know, he just got grizzled and growled, right? And he had these steely blue eyes. And I remember he was not really paying attention until they called me up to do the poem. And then he snapped like this, and he looked at me. And at that moment, I suddenly got in my head, because I'm looking at this man and I'm thinking to myself, Tyler, you don't know anything. Look at this man. He's been there. Like, he was actually in the war, and he looked like he had seen some things that he didn't want to see and that he couldn't take back. And he and he's decorated, so he's had to have seen some stuff. And I have all of these thoughts going in my head. What is he going to think? How can I present to this man who has seen these things when I am just this 14-year-old punk who hasn't seen anything? And all of this stuff got into my head, and I went up and I went, the cross, Flanders, some poppy, bah, right? I had nothing. And because I had memorized it for so long, I didn't even have a cheat sheet to go back to. I couldn't even rely back. And I remember my teacher, Mrs. Weeb, was like scrambling, trying to find me a paper. She was like, get it to him. And the vice principal was looking like, what do I do? Do I take the mic? Like, what do we do with this? Right? It was just disastrous, but it was because I allowed it to get into my head. It was a fear of judgment. I obviously didn't fear public speaking, but at that point, I had a real fear of judgment, and it messed with my physiology. It messed with my psychology. Everything went out the window. And so what I needed to know is that, like, the audience isn't judging me, and I shouldn't have focused on the one person, right? There was many people in the audience who were on my side. I needed to go over and look at a friendly face. Problem is I started to everybody's face got less and less friendly as they looked like this.
What happened? What was that total? What was the outcome?
Well, learning outcome was not to be afraid of judgment. What ended up happening was, I think Mr. Holloway Chuck, who was the VP, kind of just got me out, and we'll come back to that. And I think we had somebody play taps, and then I came back and read the poem. I think at that point I'd actually gotten a hard copy, or maybe I'd relaxed out. To be honest, I don't remember how it went, because what stuck in my mind and has been with me now for over 26, 27 years is the memory of the feeling of being terrified, and the dude's eyes. I will never forget that man's eyes for as long as I live. They reminded me, now a few of your listeners may get this reference. He reminded me of a White Walker from Game of Thrones, like crystal blue, and he was pale but still like he had a presence about him. Like, I felt him come into the room, and I'll never forget that, man. Not for my entire life.
You know, at
A lot of
14, at 14 years old, taps probably didn't mean a lot to you, you know, but like now as an adult, if that would have been me and then they played taps, that would have made it even harder for me to come back. Cause I mean, taps, it just gets you. I mean, and I never was in the service, but it's still, it really tugs at your heartstrings if you're at a funeral and they play taps.
Well, and it doesn't. See, and the thing is, but I think you're right. At 14, I probably didn't fully understand or appreciate the significance of playing taps. But I do know that because I had been in performance for as long as I have, that even to this day, if I have to do something at a ceremony, that sets the mood and it sets my tone. So it's actually, I work a lot in music. It drives my wife crazy because I will reference everything to a musical. There is not a single statement you can make that doesn't get instantly associated with a song in my brain. But I do it because music, similar to story, because music is just storytelling with sound, it allows me to embrace a physiology of something that I'm trying to project. So like even when I'm trying, like if I have to cry on film, before the cameras roll, I'll like, you know, throw on some headphones and I'll be listening and I'll be like, okay, so if I know that I need to cry, I'm for sure going to play something from Ragtime, usually Cole House Walker's Soliloquy or Sarah Brown Eyes or something like that, where I know what the emotion is and I get in and I'm just like, you know, I'm just a ball of meat. And then they, okay, roll the camera. Right? But the music is what puts me there. And that's where storytelling is so effective, because you can put somebody into your shoes. They can feel what you were doing and where you were. And because you know where you were, you can tell that story better than anyone else.
Interesting. I was just going to say the whole mindset that you're talking about. And by the way, I do the same thing. If somebody says something reminds me of a song, I bring it up, and I'm really bad for that because it usually happens at least 5 times a day. But in that mindset though too, because even I love doing it, I can't help it. There's, you know, certain things that I was thinking about, even in the podcast, because I have another podcast, not with Roy. Roy's kind of like, you know, if I get a little bit, you know, nervous, because some of our guests, like you read, like even reading your you know, bio, and some of them I'm just sitting there going, oh my gosh, and you kind of feel like this versus them, and you don't know how you're going to, and yet once you get on there, they're just people. I think it's the same thing in business too, though, when you're dealing with a client and you just, you know, the anticipation of them being greater or bigger or more judgmental or whatever the case, which causes imposter syndrome sometimes because of that. You know, I think what you're talking about is exactly right. If you can be aware of the fact that, you know, you're creating it.
Yes, it's all in your head. It really is your 5-year-old's monster in the closet. It's not real. And the funny thing is it's interesting, the pedestals too. Dr. John DeMartini has a really great process when he does his breakthrough experience. And he talks about how, you know, I can't remember how many characteristics there are, so many human traits, we'll say 48, just for a number so that I can get through this story. And he says, you know, everybody embodies it. So, you know, picture your hero that you have, right? What are the traits that you love about them, right? And maybe they're successful, or they're wealthy, or they're smart, they're intelligent, they have charisma, whatever it is, right? And then he goes, okay, where are times in your life where you had those things? Like, when were you? Because we're not one thing all the time. I just had a very good blank out stupid moment 2 seconds ago. But I also think that I'm a fairly intelligent human being. So I can both be really stupid and really smart. It doesn't define me. They're just traits that I embody at different separate times. So what he does is he's like, if you have somebody that's a hero that's on a pedestal, so what are the good traits? Now, when did you embody those traits? What are some of their bad traits? When have you embodied some of those bad traits? So that it creates this level playing field where suddenly you can see that your hero struggles with the same things that you struggle, and they may have more experience than you in overcoming that struggle, but you still have got similar experience or similar traits. Everybody has them. No one person is unique to a human trait, and that's why they're called the human traits and not the Lorianne traits or the Tyler traits or the Roy traits. They are the human traits because we all embody them. And when you can start realizing that, right? Like even when I'm entertained, right? Look at all my accomplishments. My accomplishments look good because everybody asks you to put all the things that you've done on your bio, right? Nobody says, well, if you could point out the 2 businesses that you tanked and that time that you let that guy cheat off of your exam, or the time you falsified some paperwork because you thought it was going to get you ahead and then you got totally busted for it. Or how about those couple of jobs that you got fired from? Like those aren't things that I talk about in my bio, but they're definitely a part of my story and I'm happy to share them anytime. Right? But so everybody looks good on paper because that's what we're supposed to do. I've got a really good PR lady who does that all for me. She puts together some great bios and you guys ask and I go, great. Here you go. Right? So it always sounds good until you start peeling back the layers and realizing that they're just human. We're just here. We're just going to have a conversation.
You know, it's interesting you talked about music a while ago because, you know, music is universal for everybody. And everybody has different things. But I can remember one time one of my sons asked me, he goes, Dad, how come you listen to that? You know, why that song? And I said, because I listen to this song and it takes me back to when me and your mom were dating. And I can tell you the exact place we were at, what we were doing. I can tell you what she was wearing even. That's why that song is special to me, you know. But music does. I mean, it does those stories, you know.
And music is a wonderful thing too, right? Because as you had said, not only does it put you into a mindset, but it changes your state, right? Like you now all of a sudden, when you go back now, you could be having a bad day. That song comes on the radio. You think of that, maybe the first dance with your wife, the first kiss, and you it didn't matter how bad your day was for a moment there. All of a sudden you're like, hey, life is good. You know, hey, remember? And when we realize that we have the power to do that, that our mind is doing that 1,000 times a second, and that we can control our reactions and we can control our feelings. Tony Robbins says it famously, you know, change your state and you change your way of thinking, just change your state. I can choose to be happy. I can choose to be angry. I can choose to be sad. And I know I deal with this too with even my 5-year-old, right? She doesn't get her way. Well, I'm having the worst day ever. And I love playing with her with that. I love the curiosity of it. Oh, well, what makes it the worst day ever? Did you have any good things that happened today, right? And then we go in through and she starts saying, well, yeah, and then I got to do this thing and then we played in the park and all of a sudden she's happy. And I, just like that, I switched it, right? And she would have, if I could have let her go down the life is miserable path, she would have stayed miserable. And we have the power to control our story. So if you're fearful to get on stage, well, why? Ask what's the story? What have you coded in your mind, right? The mind is just a big computer. So what computer program did you stick in to make you think that this was a terrifying and horrible thing? And how do we illuminate the falsehood of that monster in the closet?
Yeah. You know, like if you're a good storyteller, because I mean, I had some friends I grew up with, and we always had that one guy, you know, like you. So you and your buds are out, you do something, and y'all are all getting together, some other people, and tell, hey, the story about so and so. Oh, you need to let Tyler say that. Let him tell you instead of me. He's much better at it than I am, right? You know.
Well, thank you. I do have a lot of experience in doing the storytelling portion of this.
Yeah.
But practice makes perfect, right? I did not come out of the womb this way. I was very lucky in that from 6 years old, it is a gift that was nurtured. And so people have to remember, like, I have 35 years of experience and I'm still not the best storyteller that I know. I know some phenomenal storytellers. And that speaks to your point, Lorianne. Like, it's real easy for us to say, oh, but this person is better. But instead of worrying about who's better and who's worse, how am I as a storyteller, and if I want to get better, how do I improve? What are my internal metrics? Because I'm never going to be Les Brown, who, by the way, I love. I will drop his name like 3 or 4 times through the course of this podcast, because I have a huge respect for him, and I think he's an amazing human being and a phenomenal storyteller. But he does it his way. Like Les Brown, when he tells a story, he brings quotes from every famous person you could ever think of, and he tells it with a smile and a Southern accent that I'm never going to have. So I can't worry about trying to be the next Les Brown. All I can worry about is trying to be the best Tyler Foley and find my style and my way of doing it. And that's, again, if somebody's going to take the stage, that's what you have to do, is find what is your unique point of view. Because if you've been asked to public speak, there was a reason for it. Somebody asked you to do that. You have some form of story or some information that you have been asked to present. And my favorite stat when it comes to public speaking, by the way, when they've measured what makes a well-received or powerful presentation, it's only 7% content. So it doesn't matter what you say. What matters is the other part, the remaining 93%, which is how you present that information. So I'm not particularly, I don't bring any better content than half of the other speakers out there. But what I do is I tell it my way. And so the people who resonate with my way of communication, my presentation style, are going to take tons away, because they'll be like, oh yeah, it was great. And then there are people who are like, man, that guy talks a mile a minute. He needs to calm his energy down. And they're not going to take away anything because I don't resonate with them. And that's fine. I just need to find my audience. So worrying less about what people think of you and more about how are you going to show up as the best version of you. It strips all the power away. It takes all the fear away. It dissolves that monster in the closet. And now you can just be you and present your information.
Yeah. So how can our listeners reach out to you, Tyler?
Well, that's very simple. If they go to my website, which is SeanTylerFoley.com, and Sean is spelled the proper Irish way, SEAN. So SeanTylerFoley.com. They can get in contact with me. There's the connect with me. And for all of your listeners, up at the top corner, we have a little radio button called The Method. So if anybody wants a free download and learn 5 insider tricks of how to be a better public speaker that I've learned over the last 35 years, we've condensed it down into a nice little 11-page workbook, and it's free for anybody who signs up for it. So just go to SeanTylerFoley.com, click The Method, and you'll have 35 years of my information compressed into one little worksheet, and it's the best way to get a hold of me.
Wow, fantastic. That's great.
Thank you so much. This is just so much fun, really. Thank you.
Yeah, we're going to have you back on again.
Well, it would be my joy and my pleasure. If there's ever any stories that you want told, I'll come on. We'll make it the little Lorianne and Roy and Tyler campfire, and we'll bring your audience along, and we'll tell all kinds of fun stuff.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect. But thank you so much for being on. It was really a pleasure to meet you.
Absolutely.
It was my pleasure.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Be sure to visit us at lifterstory.com.